The English Society of England during the latter Middle Ages is well known to function through the medium of a trilingual culture. Three main languages were in use in this medieval period: English, Anglo-Norman or French, and Latin. The 13th century marks the flowering of Latin literature in England. Latin was mostly used for written language, especially by the church and in official records, but is also spoken by clergy and students. In England, French was the language of education and literature. French became the language of the kings and nobility of England for more than 300 years and was the verbal language of the court, administration, and culture. It is a so-called Romance language derived originally from the Latin, not Germanic. During these Norman-ruled centuries, in which English as a language had no official status and no regulation, English had become the third language in its own country. It was also during this period when English was the language mainly of the uneducated peasantry and lower classes that composed the vast majority of the population, with an estimated 95%, that many of the grammatical complexities and inflections of Old English gradually disappeared. Latin and French had been in widespread use as languages of record for centuries, but over periods of time, English and French were living vernaculars, while Latin became a dead construct. Hereafter, English was used increasingly for record purposes from the latter 14th century onward and eventually absorbed the roles of the other two, thus becoming the sole national language. Accordingly, this follows the resurgence of English. It is estimated that up to 85% of Anglo-Saxon words were lost as a result of the Viking and particularly the Norman invasions, and at one point the very existence of the English language looked to be in dire peril. But despite the shake-up that the Normans had given English, it showed its resilience once again, and 200 years after the Norman conquest, it was English, not French, that emerged as the language of England. There were numbers of contributing factors. First, the English of necessity had become Normanized, but over time the Normans also became Anglicized, particularly after 1204 when King John's ineptness lost the French part of Normandy to the King of France, and the Norman nobles were forced to look more to their English properties. Increasingly out of touch with their properties in France and with the French court and culture in general, they soon began to look on themselves as English. This leads to the second factor, that Norman French began gradually to degenerate and atrophy. While some in England spoke French and some spoke Latin and a few spoke both, everyone from the highest to the lowest spoke English, and it gradually became the lingua franca of the nation once again. This is the last contributory factor. Moving forward, let us tackle one notable personality during the Middle Ages: Geoffrey Chaucer. He was an English poet and author, widely considered the greatest English poet of the Middle Ages. He has been called the father of English literature, or alternatively the father of English poetry. Well, one of the most important contributions that Chaucer made is his contribution to the English language and English literature. It was all due to his treatment of English language in his poetry that English secured a prominent position amongst the languages of the world, not only today but in that time as well. It was Chaucer who preferred English language over Latin and French. It was a fashion and vogue of the time to use Latin and French languages in church, courts, and in any literary work, but Chaucer refused to adopt these languages for his poetry. Though the English language was in raw form, yet he ventured upon using the English language for his poetry. It was not as polished and full of vocabulary as Latin and French, but, as what James Russell Lowell said, Chaucer found his English a dialect and left it a language. He transformed the English dialect into a full-fledged language of England. Chaucer knew that Latin and French, due to its complex grammar, would lag behind English language. He was pretty sure about the bright future of the English language. That is why he adopted English language in his poetry. Now, some of his literary works that contributed much to the Middle English literature were Parliament of Fowls, Troilus and Cressida, The Legend of Good Women, and the notable The Canterbury Tales. For the continuation, here's my teammate Mr. Mark Canoy.